Just by way of introduction, my name is Marcus O'Brien Fair. I am the president of the Edithvale Federal Liberal Association. And we have, in talking about how we wanted to work through this campaign in 2011, we have talked about trying a few different methods, trying to reach out into the community and get people an opportunity to meet Martha in person and speak to her about the different issues. As many of you know, Willowdale, with all the condominiums that have been going in up and down Yonge Street and other areas, is now one of the most densely populated ridings in the entire country. And that makes a bit of a challenge for the campaign team to get Martha to every single door and meeting everybody. And we thought, well, if we're not necessarily going to be able to do that, why don't we put on a series of town halls in different parts of the riding and give people an opportunity to come in and join us and have a bit of a conversation about the election and the platform and meet Martha if you haven't had a chance to do that before and hear a little bit about the positions that she's taking on thoughts as we work through this particular election campaign. So welcome Martha Hall Finley, our past Member of Parliament, is running again for re-election on Monday, May 2nd. Hopefully future. And we did our first in this series last night up at Young and Comer. And one of the first questions I asked you last time, Martha, that probably would be helpful again tonight, is just to talk for a moment about how we got here. There's been a lot of chatter about how and why we find ourselves into yet another election, particularly here in Willowdale. Maybe you want to offer some thoughts on that, just to get us started.
Thank you, everybody, for being here. This is great. I have to say that the most frustrating thing for us well, at any time, but it becomes clear in a campaign, is when you go to the door, and we've been knocking on doors afternoons and evenings, Saturday mornings. Every once in a while you'll get somebody who just says, no, I'm not interested, I don't follow politics, I don't care, I don't. And, you know, if you don't get involved, you don't vote, you don't get involved and know why you're voting and for whom you're voting, you're just going to get your government that somebody else has chosen. And for me, I find that frustrating, and so to see engagement, to see all of you out here actively wanting to engage in some discussion is really wonderful. So thank you. First and foremost, thank you for coming in. Beta? Well, I'm glad you came. Good. So good. That makes me. Let me, as Marcus has asked, let me just say right off the bat, you have, I'm sure, heard lots of publicity, lots of ad campaigns about this so-called unnecessary election. I want to stress, we can talk about economics, we can talk about policies, we can talk about ethics, but I can tell you that I am so concerned about what has happened and exactly why we are in an election. This is the first time, not just in the history of Canada, but the first time in the history of the entire Commonwealth that a government has been found in contempt of Parliament. This is a very serious issue. It comes on the heels of two, not one, but two prorogations. It comes on the heels of Stephen Harper having called the election in 2008, notwithstanding the fact that we had agreed to have fixed elections. It comes on the heels of the refusal to provide documentation and information on the Afghan detainees, which was punted off into a committee and disappeared, much to personally my frustration. It comes on the heels of a minister forging a document and actually making it say something that was completely the opposite of what it was meant to say. And the reason that contempt of Parliament actually happened this time, it was a culmination of all of these, is that as a member of Parliament, my first job is to you as taxpayers. And one of our main jobs is to make sure that when we approve legislation, we know what that legislation is going to cost. Like when you go to buy a car, you're not going to just have somebody say, here, here are the keys and give me whatever blank check. You're going to go, you're going to check, you're going to look. You need to understand what it is you're going to be saying yes to, and you must have some idea of the cost. The government, for months and months and months and months, refused to give us parliamentarians any information of any use. They made much show of dumping paper, but none of it was real information. And so we were prevented, it was hidden, it was refused, we were prevented from doing our jobs. I can tell you that right now, I would much rather be doing my job. I mean, it's great. It's great in an election. I get a chance to meet all sorts of people in a way that we don't necessarily do in the normal course. But I would much rather be doing my job to help do the important things for this country. The only reason we're having this election right now is because Stephen Harper refused to allow us to do our jobs for months. And finally, the Speaker of the House of Commons said that that was in contempt of Parliament. And I have to say, just as a Canadian, it's embarrassing. I mean, there's all sorts of other upset about the lack of respect for Parliament and democracy, but it's embarrassing to know that this is the first time in the history of the entire Commonwealth this has happened.
They're going to win.
Well, we're going to do everything we can to see a change in Ottawa. So that was to answer Marcus's first question about why we're here. But I will say that now that we are here, we have an opportunity to make some serious decisions about some very stark choices facing us. And I'll go back to our responsibility as parliamentarians for Canadians and taxpayers and their roles as taxpayers. I mean, we all pay tax. But we have an obligation to make sure that the taxes that we pay go to make sure that we have a country that we want, a country that reflects our collective values. It's one of the strengths of Canada that we work on a collective basis that way, that we in fact have that opportunity to say, these are the politicians that we are voting for that we want to run this country, and this is why. And so now that we are in an election, much as I would rather we didn't get to this point, now that we're here, we have stark choices. Money is not unlimited. We don't want Canadians to pay more tax than is necessary. I actually believe in a smaller but efficient government. But I believe in prosperity with a purpose. I don't believe in wasting money. I believe in being fiscally prudent. I believe in economic responsibility. And when you have, in this election now, the choices between $30 billion plus, even the Pentagon's now acknowledged that there is no surefire way to determine even if that's the right price for stealth fighter attack jets, when I'm not even sure that Canada is a stealth fighting attack country. Strong military history, trust me, I have every respect for the need to step up when we're called upon to do so, but we are not a stealth fighter attack country. And we're not, I don't think, should be spending billions of dollars on a plane we're not sure we need, that whether it's the right one. We know we need to replace our F-18s at some point, but we don't know that this is the right plane. We don't know how much it's going to cost. I just learned the other day that the $30 billion price tag doesn't include the engines. but this is the frustration that we have. We have a massive deficit. After a government was given a $13 billion surplus 5 years ago, we're now back into a major deficit, and we have Harper saying that he wants to borrow more money so that he can give $6 billion. Yeah, and we have to be careful with this. When he talks about cutting taxes for Canadians, these tax reductions only benefit the 5% wealthiest companies in the country. By far the biggest job creators in Canada are small and medium enterprises. They don't benefit from these tax cuts. So Stephen Harper wants to borrow more money after he spent, don't even get me started on G20. After spending us in a major deficit, wants to borrow billions more to give a tax break to the 5% wealthiest companies. And just think about that, wealthiest. That means they're the least in need of a break. Then you add in billions more for U.S.-style mega-prisons. You have billions and billions and billions of dollars going to stealth fighter attack jets, corporate tax breaks, when we are already at a very competitive tax level, and prisons. Well, I, for one, want to see instead that we invest in education, that we invest in home care, that we look after seniors who are struggling more and more all the time by improvements to the Canada Pension Plan, by ensuring that our students have a better opportunity to go. As Mike Ignacio says, he wants a Canada where if you get the grades, you get to go. I like that. I think that's really, really important, and that's part of our program that I'm very proud of. So, me talking way too long. What I'd like to do is to make sure, and with Marcus's help, that we make this a discussion, not just react. But I felt it was important to give you a sense of why we're here, and now that we're here, some of the really stark choices that we have to make as Canadians.
We're gonna open things up to the audience to let you ask a question, and just before we do that, one of the questions we talked about last night was the notion of growing the economy and the best way to grow the economy for future prosperity. Stephen Harper talked about in his platform that these tax cuts would be a good way, in his opinion, to grow the economy moving forward. I think the Liberal Party has some different ideas in mind about how best to advance our economy for the future.
Well, I would say the Liberal Party and almost every other economist. I mean, Stephen Harper is relying on one, Jack Mintz from the University of Calgary, who is saying that these corporate tax cuts to the biggest and wealthiest companies create jobs. There have been many studies. There was one the Globe and Mail actually published just last week, another one that shows that that has not been happening. Every major economic study will show that the biggest job creators in Canada are the small and medium enterprises. The entrepreneurial efforts by so many people in this country, including, I will say, a lot of new Canadians too. And that's a whole other topic when we talk about foreign credentials, we talk about immigration. But the small and medium enterprises are the job drivers in this country. They don't benefit from these tax cuts. We have actually many studies that show that the big corporations, despite reductions in corporate taxes, have not, in fact, correspondingly added jobs to the economy. So when Stephen Harper gets up and says that, he knows it's not true. Where we really need to spur on the economy is, in fact, the support to the small and medium enterprises, the support from the educational perspective, so you end up with people with the right skills to actually enhance and build into that economy. But I will also say one of the parts of our platform that I'm really excited about is the eco-retrofit. Many of you might remember the economic stimulus. There was a home renovation tax credit. Well, you know what? That was great. A lot of people benefited from that. Only people who owned homes, people who rented didn't benefit, but a lot of people benefited. It was very popular. My problem with it was that it didn't do anything more when it could have done so much. It didn't require the renovations to be increasing energy efficiency. It didn't do anything to require the enhancements to make your homes more energy efficient. It just said, sure, go out and build a back deck. Now go and enhance your kitchen. Well, great for those who now have a nice back deck. But the eco-retrofit that the Liberal Party platform has is a number of things. It's big. It's $13,500 credit. That's a lot of money. The overall tax saving will be actually a little over $2,000 cash. It's refundable, so it's not just the wealthy, it's those, whoever does it actually, regardless of your taxable income, you will get that money, which is a very important distinction from a number of the conservative efforts. But it also will encourage people to make their homes more energy efficient, which will end up saving them money in their energy bills. And with oil skyrocketing through the roof, especially given what's happening in Africa and the Middle East, that's a real concern. So one, you give a direct benefit to people, encouraging them to make their homes more energy efficient. You actually save them money because their homes are going to be more energy efficient, all good for the environment. But one of the things that I'm really intrigued about is that with that kind of scale, you are giving a huge incentive to all of the small and medium enterprises that are involved in green technologies, in the green renovations, so the energy efficient windows, new insulation technology. That's fabulous too, because we want to build on those industries. We want to build on those enterprises. So I'm really excited. That's one thing I'm actually really excited about in terms of the Natalie Rosier and I actually did a press conference in Ottawa the day that they came out with their report and their call for an inquiry into what happened. I was standing there beside her saying yes. So like you, was very upset at what happened. And I was upset too at the lack of a public response. And I think, now that we have everybody here in this room, I keep hearing from these polls that Canadians don't really, I don't know whether it's a lack of understanding what happened, a lack of media attention to this. But what happened in June of G20 in terms of security and the removal of rights, what happened to us as parliamentarians when the government fell because of a contempt of parliament? I mean, this is astounding. You don't just run away from government when government doesn't please you. What did he say in the debate the other day? Harper called it, it's just parliamentary bickering. No, I'm sorry. This is our democracy, And you can't just shut down. You can't just prorogue. I mean, the first prorogation was the first one was we had fixed election dates that apparently didn't please him, and he decided to have an election in 2008. And then we saw what happened. And then we had a prorogation 4 days before he knew he was going to be facing a vote of non-confidence. That's how our parliament works. And I just hope that those of you in this room who feel similarly, please help me in making this known. I mean, you have so many, look what is happening. You can see her, I'm getting a little bit. I'm so glad that you are passionate. Thank you, because I am. I mean, here I'm driving up and I'm listening to the CBC and they're talking about what's happening in Libya, right? What happened in Ivory Coast? What's happening in Libya? What's happening in countries all around the world? If you look at Philadelphia, we have a very significant Chinese population that have come from China. We have a very significant Persian population. People from Iran, significant populations of people who have come from other regimes where they don't have that democracy. Right? We owe it to ourselves to stand up for this and to not simply let the spin doctors suggest that somehow this is parliamentary victory. It is far more important. Great question, great comment. Thank you, and a great question. I will actually say that Michael Ignatieff is an internationalist. When you hear these criticisms of the fact that he has lived and worked abroad, so have I, and I think that's great. I actually think that having people who have come from other countries, who have grown up here, lived in other countries, come back, that's Canada. That's the internationalist, that nature of Canada that I think has contributed so much to the wonderful place we've got. But he also has that. He has a very international view. I, up until the election, have been the international trade critic, and so very involved in Canada's role more on an economic basis, but one of the things that Michael has been very good about promoting for the last year has been this global networks concept. And it's that trade and engagement with other countries is so much more than just imports and exports. That it's engagement at the student level, at the education level, at the innovation level, at the cooperation on research and development, arts and culture, which the Harper government completely slashed any support for Canadian people engaged in Canadian arts and cultures, in arts and culture going abroad. And this is how we engage with the rest of the world. In terms of foreign aid, yes, we were very upset to see the Harper government pull away from Africa almost entirely. And as you would know, we can't just drop a little bit and hope that it'll do something. You have to be committed. It's not part of the Liberal platform, but I actually will take the opportunity to say that Paul Martin has been extremely involved in two areas since how do we say his retirement? Well, since Paul Martin's retirement, he has, and I think it exhibits that passion that isn't just here, I'm out doing this to get elected, it's a real passion for him. He has been working tremendously hard in Africa with a number of organizations to helping get set up on the ground. And he's also been hugely involved in helping our Aboriginal communities here in Canada, both of which I'm very proud of the fact that he continues to do. But yes, the Liberal Party has a history of being very internationalist in its approach, and if we get a Liberal government, you will see that happen. I would like to see, just like I said, I touched on briefly the need for a foreign policy review. I mean, I do have a strong military background in my family. I'm proud of that. I know that we need to make sure that we have that. But I really have reservations about 65 stealth fighter attack jets. But I particularly want us to engage in a thorough analysis of what Canada's role really should be. And that includes defense. It includes peacemaking, whatever we want to call it now, because the world has changed. The encouragement of good governance around the world, foreign aid, foreign development aid, all of that, in my view, they're all interrelated, and I would really like to focus on taking the time to really determine where Canada thinks it should be and where it should be over the next, not 3 years or 5 years, but the next 10, 20 years and more. As a trade critic, I will say the Liberal Party is pro-free trade. We want trade. We understand the economics of it. We understand the benefits. But it has to be done in a way that serves Canada's interests. There's been a lot of scaremongering out there about the trade deal with Europe. It's the most comprehensive deal in a sense. It builds on the fact that there are all sorts of other relationships that we can and should have with other countries. There's some real benefits associated with it. There are some other concerns about things that Europe has put on the table. Public procurement is one of them. And there have been allegations that somehow this deal will force every province and every municipality to have their hands tied in terms of public procurement. It's not what happened. And it frustrates me because those of us who are involved, we know that in any negotiation, people put things on the table knowing that they're going to have to give up. It's a negotiation. There's back and forth. The Canadian negotiators are very well aware of the concern. The provinces, for the first time, the provinces are actually at the table in these negotiations. So they're not going to agree to things such as public procurement that will tie their hands and prevent them from using the procurement process, for example, to ensure local employment or safety standards or whatever. So if I can just say, yes, we will continue. I do believe in trade. I do believe that this has some real benefits. But notwithstanding some of the scaremongering that's out there, there's a very strong recognition on the part of the negotiators, on the part of the Liberal Party, of some of the issues, and that we will not support a trade agreement that we don't believe is in place. So the negotiations are still going. There will not be a formal exchange of offers until after the election, and I think that's wise. But the people who are negotiating, we have some excellent. I mean, it's almost too difficult to know where to start. I mean, there's just so much. But I will tell you something. I'm actually quite an admirer of Preston Dennis. And I know that may seem odd because he and I disagree on some significant policy issues, trust me. But I have great respect for Preston Manning because one of the key things he wanted to do was ensure democratic processes, accountability, transparency, small but efficient government. He didn't like that unelected Senate. I mean, and I actually think the Senate is very important. It's one area where we disagree. But he legitimately has held these beliefs, still does. And he has watched the Harper government run on 5.5 years ago accountability, transparency, ethics, the Senate, spending, right? And I have actually given speeches where I said, I have no idea where the Conservative went in Conservative. Because they've spent like, not to be insulting to drunken sailors, but they've spent like drunken sailors. They have been completely hypocritical of the Senate. They have the lack of accountability, ethics. I mean, Bev Oda, I think, like, how would you like it if you had gone through all of the work as a federal civil servant to make a decision on Kairos, a decision that was consistent with what has been done for decades, and have your name sign the bottom of that letter, and have somebody else come in and put in a knot pretending that that's actually what you had said? I mean, I'd be, words escape. When we had 4 members of the senior, okay, now I'm going to go down a little bit of a path, right? Ad scam sponsorship. That was a small number of criminals. It was not a Liberal Party program, despite all of the efforts that were made to make it look like it was somehow a Liberal Party. It wasn't. It was a small number of people who were criminals who were establishing personal gain. The in-and-out scandal, for which there are 4 senior conservatives, including 2 sitting conservative senators, could be facing jail time. You're not even seeing, like, nobody's even hearing this. They could be right now facing jail time because of electoral and taxpayer fraud. But these guys organized this whole in-and-out scheme that was contrary to the rules. There are, I think it's 9 ridings. It involves 67 different ridings, where money was put in and taken advantage of the way that the rules allowed more spending on elections than was allowed. Yeah, that took the election, I think, because you're just simply not allowed to spend more money than you're supposed to. But what's more egregious to me is that there are 9 ridings that in fact got taxpayer money rebates based on money they never spent. There are 9 conservative riding associations that have money in the bank that the taxpayers gave them based on lying about what they spent in the campaign.
I think one of the fundamental questions going into this election was what is going to captivate the Canadian electorate, whether it would be some of these ethical issues that we've been talking a lot about tonight, dealing with the Harper government, or to what extent it is other things that are going to impact Canadian families and then the average person in terms of making their daily lives a little bit easier. Do you have a sense in terms of the conversations that you've been having with people throughout the riding as to which side of that tends to be resonating more with people?
Well, and that's a great debate, right? Why did Michael bring up all of these negatives in the debate? Why, or some people would say, well, why didn't he talk about what he's going to do for Canadians more? I had somebody say, why didn't he show enough of a vision for the country? Well, it's hard to show a vision for the country when you're trashing the other guy. And I will say, you saw Jack Layton coming and swinging, but an NDP can do that. If Michael Ignatieff had done the same thing and behaved the same way as Jack Layton, he would have been regarded as an arrogant, flippant liberal. But somehow, because of the different roles, it was okay for Jack to do it, although Jack lied about the 70% being away from Charles, which I thought was really awful. But in any event, it is interesting because you have people saying, we want to know what you're going to do. So I love the family pack, I love the learning passport, I love the home care proposals, I love the fact that we're going to improve the Canada Pension Plan, and in fact add a voluntary element to it, because I think that's actually a really important part of it as well. I really like the eco-retrofit, as you can tell from my earlier enthusiasms. I love the platform that we have. I love the daycare and early learning. I was so disappointed when we had that on the table. We had daycare and early learning. My colleague Kim Dryden had worked so hard in getting approval and agreement with every province to do something. It was there on the table ready to go. We also had a hugely detailed plan to implement the Kyoto Accord, and we also had the Kelowna Accord with Paul Martin, and when Jack Layton goes around saying, well, the Liberals don't keep their promises, it was Jack Layton who brought down the number. And unlike Tommy Douglas with Lester Pearson, where there was an opportunity to actually implement the health care system, implement the Canada Pension Plan, a number of years ago, Jack Layton lost a huge opportunity to really contribute to this country. lost 3 incredibly important policy opportunities that were there, ready to go, ready on the table to go. And it was Jack Clayton who got down the phone. So when he says, I get a bit frustrated. But it's the, do you go negative or do you go positive? I hear at the door, people are really upset at Sweden County. I've heard some very stronger than I would even, I'm reassured in the sense because it means that people are watching, but there's a very, very negative against Harper personally. But then you have also, we don't want you to go negative like they are, we want you to become. So it's a combination of that. Saying we're going to get us out of deficit in 4 to 5 years. By the way, the International Monetary Fund has said no. You are in a structural deficit. They have confirmed, looking at all the numbers, that the current government has given no indication, nothing in its numbers to show that we will get out of a structural deficit. So when Harper says, 4 years, 5 years, he's blowing smoke. My problem is that we actually criticize his platform by saying you're going to give a tax credit to somebody, when you get out of deficit, that's only 4 or 5 years from now. We're actually almost implicitly acknowledging that they're going to get us out of deficit. I keep saying, wait a minute, guys. Why are we saying 4 or 5 years? So here's my quiz. Here's my little quiz. The last Conservative Prime Minister to actually take government deficit into a surplus position. Because that's what Harper says he's going to do. That's what Liberals have done a few times. But the last Conservative Prime Minister to actually take the Canadian government from deficit into surplus position. No.
That was my guess.
After? Oh boy, Canadian history. The only Conservative Prime Minister to take Canadian government from deficit to a surplus was none other than Sir John A. Macdonald in 1889.
May sort of meander or mingle a little after the fact. People have a chance to get some cookies and coffee or tea or juice over here and ask any questions that weren't asked earlier. Martha, just before you give us any final thoughts that you want to, I am personally struck by a bit of a different tone in the room conversation tonight than we had last night. Last night, a lot of the conversation really dwelled on sort of specific policy points within the local platform. Tonight, there was much more of a discussion about how the Liberal Party could better get their message out. And I think probably some frustration in the room. People here that maybe align to your way of thinking, but aren't seeing that resonate in the community. Would there be any advice that you would give to the people here tonight that maybe come out of here sort of agreeing with what you've had to say, and ways that they can help you sort of get that message out to family, friends, and neighbors?
Okay, so for anybody who didn't know, Marcus is also, he's the president of the Riding Association. He has a totally other full-time job, but he is also the campaign manager. So the fact that he's just asked me how I can encourage you to help is really quite selfish. He's really doing it for him. But in all seriousness, like I said at the beginning, one of the frustrations that we have is when we go to the door and somebody says, oh, I'm just not interested, I'm not. Please talk to your friends and neighbors. Get them engaged. The last time in 2008, we had the lowest voter turnout ever. And most of them were Liberals, as a matter of fact. So for the Liberals in the room, I try to make it nonpartisan, but for the Liberals in the room, vote! It was extraordinary. When the Conservatives talk about the gains that were made in the GTA, and they did. A number of ridings changed hands, a number of ridings went Conservative. The analysis from the 2006 to 2008 numbers, they weren't gains, they were Liberal losses. The Conservative vote actually went down in most of those ridings. It did across the country. The problem was that the Liberal vote plummeted. Please get people engaged. You're engaged, you're here tonight, and I thank you for it. But we need you to talk to your family, to talk to your neighbors. I don't actually care how, well, I do care how they vote. But quite honestly, I am confident enough that if somebody is paying attention, they learn about the different platforms, they learn about what's happening, I'm pretty confident that I'm going to get a liberal vote out of it. So I can say, learn, get people engaged, get them out to vote. Don't say it has to be a liberal vote, just say get out, learn about the issues, and vote. Because if you don't vote, you don't get involved, you get the government that somebody else chooses. And that's something that a lot of people have fought for in this country, and that's something that a lot of people in a lot of other places are fighting for right now. It's a right and it's a privilege, and I think we should make sure we exercise it. So thank you.